Hello, everyone. We're here for our time period 2 review for the AP United States History exam for the year 2017, and this is the time period of 1607 to 1754. It begins with the founding of the first permanent British settlement at Jamestown, and it ends with the beginning of the French and Indian War. So let us begin. The overarching theme here is a very clear one. Europeans and American Indians maneuvered and fought for dominance, control, and security in North America, and distinctive colonial and native societies emerged. So we want to know about relationships with Native Americans, and we want to learn how these colonies developed in North America. So here's the timeline I have for you. I'll go through this briefly and see if you understand it. 1607 is the founding of Jamestown. Remember, those people arrived, it was all men who were looking to get wealthy. They struggled early on, largely due to a lack of work ethic. It was not until John Smith and John Rolfe instilled that work ethic in them and the planting of tobacco that led to the success of the Jamestown colony. And I guess it's possible that Pocahontas had something to do with it as well. 1619 is the first time that African slaves will be sent to North America. The slave trade had started in the 1500s, but that was down to the Caribbean. Separatists will form the next British permanent settlement, and that will be at Plymouth. So those were people who were looking to break away from the Church of England. But if you go to 1629, there will be a new set of British British citizens who come here for religious reasons, but they were not looking to break away. The Massachusetts Bay Colony was simply looking to improve on the society. That is when their leader, John Winthrop, gave that speech referred to as a city upon a hill, but I'll talk about that later. Anne Hutchinson was one of the members of Massachusetts Bay who was banished to Rhode Island. Maryland, which was one of the Chesapeake colonies, was created originally for Catholics. They later allowed Catholics and Protestants to practice with the Act of Toleration. Did not allow other religions, though. The Halfway Covenant, these initial Massachusetts Bay settlers who were there for religious reasons, the second and third generation was becoming less religious. So this and that, therefore, it would make it impossible for them to be full members of the colony. So the Halfway Covenant basically made it easier for those younger people to still be members of the colony, to not have to go through, for example, the religious conversion. King Philip's War is a conflict between Native Americans and the New England colonists in 1675. Bacon's Rebellion is a conflict between Native Americans and the Virginia colonists, the Jamestown colonists, in 1676. The Pueblo Revolt is a conflict between the Spanish in Santa Fe, present-day New Mexico, and the Pueblo Indians. The Salem Witch Trials, some of you did your research paper on this. The Salem Witch Trials show the hysteria of women who were not fulfilling the same expectations as the colony had for them. And the Zenger trial is a trial that established the precedent of freedom of the press. All right, I know this is a difficult time period to figure out, so let's get a little more thematic approach here. First of all, the big ideas you want to be familiar with. How do the Spanish, French, Dutch, and English compare to each other? What are the similarities? What are the differences? How do these groups interact with the Native Americans? Probably should have put why, how and why did slavery develop in the colonies? And how does the climate and geography impact the different colonial regions? So let's start with the Spanish. And we mentioned the Spanish in time period 1 because they are the only Europeans who were successfully settled at that time in the New World. So the 3 Gs is a review for you: gold, God, and glory. All trade was required to go through any Spanish ports. They established, as I told you earlier, St. Augustine of Florida, but they also have Santa Fe in 1610. Converting to Christianity was a primary focus of this encomienda system. And then here's this Pueblo Revolt of 1680. So there were only 2,000 Spanish people living in this community, but there were 30,000 natives there, and one of the tribes was the Pueblo Indians. Spanish priests and government officials were restricting some of the Native American cultural and religious practices, and of course forcing them to work in the encomienda system. So this revolt is where natives killed hundreds of the Spanish leaders. So this is actually an initial success for the natives, but a few years later, the Spanish did regain control of the colony, and the impact of this is a greater attempt at assimilation. However, they did give the Pueblos a few more freedoms to probably prevent a future rebellion of that nature. All right, now we're going to go to the French and the Dutch. The French were in Canada, and the French were in Louisiana, north and south. The Dutch, as we all know from New York, the Dutch settled what was called New Amsterdam or New Netherlands, and then the Dutch would eventually have to cede that colony to the British. The French probably had the most peaceful relationship with the natives. They also made money through the fur trade, which was not interrupted by the natives. Some of the French actually even intermarried with the natives. And the Dutch were focused on shipping and trade routes. They were not as much as the French, but did not have the same difficulty as the English did with the natives. All right, let's now go to the focal point, and that is the English colonization, which will eventually become the 13 colonies. I do hope you all understand we don't just wake up one morning and say, let's have 13 colonies. That was a purely random number that developed after Georgia was the 13th colony in around 1735, if my memory is correct. So the English, they settled in New England at least, as both males and females. Some of them, as I said, came for economic opportunities. Others were trying to escape religious persecution. I should have put a third group that was trying to make the religion the envy of the world. The South is more agricultural. North is focused more on shipping. Indentured servitude was one way that they brought people here. They would pay for their trip to the New World, and in return, those people would have to work anywhere from 4 to 7 years for them. Something called the headright system was another way to attract settlers to the region. If you brought 50 people with you, then land was provided for the settlers who did so. And definitely know the English had more conflict with the Native Americans, as you can see from the examples there. So let's focus now on these first two regions, 1607 and 1620. We'll start with the Chesapeake, and that would be Jamestown, which eventually becomes Virginia. Jamestown had a warmer climate. I have a feeling you guys like to go back and forth, so we'll do it that way. The Chesapeake region is Virginia and Maryland, and it is a warmer climate. New England would be Plymouth and Massachusetts Bay, eventually becoming Massachusetts, had a cooler climate. Because the Chesapeake had a warmer climate, it would be difficult to kill off the germs, so there would be more diseases. Whereas because New England had a cooler climate, there would be less disease spreading throughout the colony. Chesapeake was mostly men, and that is because their motivation was economic, to get rich and either send the money back or go back themselves. For New England, many of the motivations were religious. That's why they showed up as families. The warmer climate led to more farming with Chesapeake settlers, and being closer with nice natural ports, the New England area focused on shipbuilding. Tobacco was the key crop for the Chesapeake region. Fishing was the key item for the New England colonists. The leaders, John Smith and John Rolfe, were the Chesapeake leaders, and this man, John Winthrop, was a very strict ruler of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. He is the one who banished Roger Williams to Rhode Island. Roger Williams, who believed in a separation of church and state, and he's the one that banished Anne Hutchinson after her trial. House of Burgesses is a first representative government in the New World. That was in Virginia, and town meetings were essential to Massachusetts life. They would have all of the religious and political functions in these town meeting locations. Very good. Next, this is just the colonies by region. So New Hampshire, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island are your New England colonies. New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware are your middle colonies. Let's focus on Pennsylvania for a second. This was given as a land grant to William Penn, who used it for his followers who were known as Quakers, officially known as the Society of Friends. and they were very pacifist. They were in favor of treating the Native Americans fairly, peacefully, believed in women's equality. They were against war, as I said, against slavery, just a good old around group of people. And then the southern colonies will be Virginia, Maryland, the Carolinas, North and South, and Georgia. Georgia was a colony for people who were in debt. It was also established so that they would have a buffer between Spanish Florida and the Carolinas, which were British. Okay, and then the last setup here, just some random topics. Know the term mercantilism. Mercantilism is when colonies exist for the benefit of the mother country, and they did have laws that were regulating the colonies economically. They were called navigation acts. It's just that they were very rarely enforced in the 1600s. It will not be until the French Indian War is over that you will see this practice of salutary neglect die out, and they will start to enforce them, which will anger them and lead to the American Revolution. The African slave trade, we've reviewed this before. Just be familiar with the Middle Passage and the devastating impact that this had on the individuals. King Philip's War, sometimes called Metacom's War, is when 3 Wampanoag Indians were executed in Plymouth. And they responded by killing some of the New England colonists, and this led to a very violent confrontation. It's difficult to get the exact number of people who were killed, but it is very, very devastating. So there you have it. I'm realizing what I did not do is Bacon's Rebellion, and I apologize for that. So I should find it and go over it. It's in the Chesapeake region, and Bacon's Rebellion, I guess we'll go to the timeline, it really shows like basically in the Jamestown colony, the wealthy people on the coast had kind of a secret deal with the Native Americans that they would not interrupt their trade. And when the Native Americans attacked the poor people in the colony who were off the coast, they expected the governor, his name was William Berkeley, they expected him to protect them. He refused to do so because of this deal he had. So they responded under the leadership of Nathaniel Bacon, and they killed Native Americans. Sadly, they initially killed the wrong tribe, being confused, I guess. But then they continued to march towards Jamestown and tried to set it on fire. There's a possibility that Bacon would have been successful had he not suffered the dreaded disease known as dysentery. And this Bacon's Rebellion was eventually crushed. However, it just shows already early on that there was this gap between the rich and the poor that had developed. So there you have it. I should also tell you that Roger Williams was banished to Rhode Island because of his belief in separation of church and state. As you can see, it's a difficult time period to do briefly. I did the best that I could. Wish everybody the best of luck. Enjoy the rest of the brief review videos, and I will see you in class.